Everyone in the room laughed when they heard her called just an assistant. They did not know the most powerful man there was already watching, and he was about to reveal the truth they refused to see. The ballroom of the Blackwood Foundation was filled with elegance, expensive suits, and quiet conversations between people who had spent their lives surrounded by influence. Crystal lights reflected across polished floors, and every guest carried the confidence of someone who believed they belonged among the elite. But standing near the edge of the room was a woman many people overlooked. Amara Johnson held a small tablet in her hands, reviewing the evening schedule with the same calm focus she brought to every task. She was not there to impress anyone. She was there because Alexander Blackwood trusted her more than anyone else in his organization. For 3 years, Amara had been the assistant who knew every detail of Alexander's demanding world. She remembered important meetings, protected private information, and solved problems before anyone even noticed they existed. Yet to some people in that room, she was only a title on a business card. Daniel Whitmore noticed her standing beside Alexander's team and smiled with quiet arrogance. He had built his reputation by judging people through appearances, family names, and social status. "You know," Daniel said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "some people forget their place when they spend too much time around powerful individuals." The conversations around them slowly faded. Amara looked at him calmly, unsure why he felt the need to make such a statement. Daniel continued, "Being a good assistant does not mean someone belongs in a different world. Some roles are meant to stay exactly where they are." A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. They understood the message behind his words. Daniel was not talking about work. He was questioning Amara's value as a person. He wanted everyone to believe that someone like her could never truly belong beside someone like Alexander. Amara took a quiet breath and simply replied, "A person's worth is not decided by the title written on their position." Her voice was steady. There was no anger. No need to prove herself. That calm response surprised some guests more than an argument would have. Across the room, Alexander Blackwood had heard everything. The 42-year-old Mafia Boss stood near a tall window overlooking the city lights, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Most people knew him as a man who commanded attention without asking for it. They knew his reputation. They knew his influence. But they did not know what he saw when he looked at Amara. He did not see an assistant. He saw the person who had stayed loyal when others only cared about opportunity. He saw the woman who treated every person with the same respect, whether they had power or nothing to offer her. Daniel believed he had embarrassed Amara in front of everyone, but he did not realize he had made one mistake. He had spoken about the one person Alexander Blackwood respected the most. The room remained unaware of what was coming. Amara quietly returned her attention to her work, believing the moment had passed. But Alexander stepped forward, and the expression on his face told everyone that the evening was about to change. Because sometimes the person everyone ignores is the person who holds the greatest value. And that night, the world of power was about to learn the difference between status and character. The room remained quiet after Alexander Blackwood stepped forward, but the tension was no longer about Amara Johnson. Everyone was watching the man who rarely showed emotion, wondering what he would say next. Alexander looked toward Daniel Whitmore with a calm expression that carried more weight than anger ever could. "You seem to believe a person's value comes from their position," Alexander said. "That is a mistake many people make." The guests listened carefully. They knew Alexander was not someone who wasted words. When he spoke, people paid attention. Daniel tried to maintain his confidence, but the certainty in his expression slowly faded. He expected Alexander to ignore the situation or move on. He never expected him to acknowledge Amara publicly. Alexander turned toward Amara. For years, she has been the person who keeps everything organized when everyone else is focused on appearances. She knows more about this company than most people in this room. Amara looked surprised. She had never asked Alexander to defend her. In fact, she had never wanted recognition at all. She simply believed in doing her work with honesty and dedication. That was what made her different. While others searched for attention, Amara searched for solutions. While others tried to impress powerful people, she treated everyone with the same respect. The conversation eventually moved on, but the moment stayed in everyone's mind. Later that evening, Amara stepped away from the crowd and returned to the quiet hallway outside the ballroom. She looked out at the city lights, wondering why a simple comment had turned into such a significant moment. She had faced judgment before. She knew there would always be people who measured others by wealth, background, or appearance. But she had learned long ago that she could not allow someone else's opinion to decide who she was. Alexander found her there a few minutes later. "You handled yourself well," he said. Amara smiled slightly. "I have learned that not every comment deserves a response." Alexander studied her for a moment. That answer revealed exactly why he trusted her. Many people around him were skilled at saying the right thing when they wanted something. Amara was different because she remained the same whether anyone was watching or not. "Daniel was wrong about you," Alexander said. Amara shook her head gently. "Maybe he just does not know me." That simple response surprised Alexander. She was not looking for revenge. She was not waiting for someone to embarrass Daniel in return. She simply understood that people often judged what they did not take the time to understand. For Alexander, that was a rare quality. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted influence, connections, and advantages. Almost everyone saw his name before they saw him as a person. But Amara had always done the opposite. She saw the person first. The next morning, Alexander arrived at his office earlier than usual. On his desk was a detailed report Amara had prepared overnight, solving several issues before they became problems. He looked through the pages and realized something he had known for a long time, but never said aloud. Amara was not valuable because she worked for him. She was valuable because of who she was. And while Daniel believed he had exposed her weakness in front of everyone, he had actually revealed something else. He had revealed how little he understood the people around him. Because the woman he dismissed as ordinary was the person Alexander Blackwood trusted the most. The morning after the charity event, Alexander Blackwood arrived at his office before sunrise. The city outside his windows was slowly waking up, but inside the quiet room, he was already reviewing reports, schedules, and decisions that required his attention. This was the world people knew about Alexander. The powerful businessman. The man who controlled every detail around him. The man who rarely allowed anyone close enough to understand him. But there was one person who had always seen beyond that image. Amara Johnson. As Alexander looked through the documents on his desk, he noticed something that had become familiar over the years. Every report was organized perfectly. Every possible problem had already been considered. Every detail was handled before it became a concern. That was Amara's way. She never needed recognition. She never reminded anyone about her contributions. She simply did what needed to be done. Later that morning, Alexander called Amara into his office. She entered carrying her usual tablet and notes, ready to discuss the day's schedule. "You stayed late preparing these reports," Alexander said. Amara looked slightly surprised. "It was part of my responsibility." Alexander looked at her carefully. Most people would make sure everyone knew they did extra work. Amara smiled. "I think the work matters more than who receives credit for it." That answer stayed with him. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who wanted to be noticed. They wanted their names remembered. They wanted others to see their importance. Amara was the opposite. She believed doing the right thing was valuable even when nobody applauded. Outside the office, Daniel Whitmore continued telling people that Alexander had become too trusting. He believed Amara had gained influence simply because she was close to Alexander. Daniel failed to understand that trust was never something Alexander gave easily. It was earned through years of loyalty and character. Meanwhile, Alexander began remembering the moments that proved Amara's true nature. He remembered when she stayed late to help employees solve problems during a difficult period. He remembered when she treated the cleaning staff with the same respect she gave executives. He remembered when she refused a personal reward because another employee needed the opportunity more. Those moments were small, but they revealed everything about her. Amara did not act with kindness because she wanted something in return. She acted that way because it was part of who she was. That afternoon, Alexander and Amara attended a business meeting where several executives discussed a major project. During the conversation, one executive overlooked an important detail. Before anyone noticed the mistake, Amara quietly pointed it out and offered a solution. The room became silent for a moment. People looked at her differently. They were beginning to understand what Alexander had known for years. Her value was not connected to her job title. It was connected to her ability, intelligence, and integrity. After the meeting, Alexander walked beside her through the hallway. "You realize you never defend yourself when people underestimate you," he said. Amara looked ahead and replied, I cannot control what people choose to believe. I can only control who I choose to be. Alexander stopped for a moment. Those words carried more meaning than she probably realized. In his world, people often fought to prove their importance. Amara simply lived hers. And for the first time, Alexander wondered if the person who understood strength the most was not the person with the most power. Maybe it was the person who never needed power to prove their worth. The days after the charity event brought a subtle shift in the way people looked at Amara Johnson. She had not changed her behavior. She still arrived early every morning, organized Alexander Blackwood's schedule, and treated everyone around her with the same patience and respect. But something had changed in the eyes of those who once overlooked her. They had started noticing what Alexander had always known. Amara was not valuable because of the position she held. She was valuable because of the person she was. However, not everyone was willing to accept that truth. Daniel Whitmore continued believing that status determined importance. He invited several business associates to a private dinner, hoping to remind everyone of his influence. During the conversation, he casually mentioned Amara again, suggesting that people were confusing loyalty with ability. His words were carefully chosen, but the message was clear. He still believed someone like Amara could never truly belong in Alexander's world. What Daniel did not know was that Alexander had already begun seeing the difference between people who wanted power and people who deserved trust. A few days later, Alexander held an important company meeting with several senior executives. The room was filled with experienced professionals, each person prepared to discuss strategies and future plans. Amara stood quietly near the table, taking notes as she always did. During the meeting, one executive presented a proposal that appeared impressive at first glance. Everyone seemed ready to approve it, but Amara noticed a small detail that could create unnecessary complications in the future. She waited until the right moment before politely explaining her concern. The room became quiet as everyone reviewed the information again. Her observation was correct. Alexander looked around the table and saw something important. Many people in that room had more impressive titles than Amara, but very few had her level of awareness and responsibility. After the meeting ended, one executive approached her and admitted that he had underestimated her. Amara simply smiled and said she appreciated his honesty. She did not need an apology to feel important. She already knew her own value. Later that evening, Alexander found himself thinking about that moment. He had spent years building a world where trust was difficult to earn. He believed people were usually motivated by personal gain. But Amara challenged that belief every day. She had access to information, opportunities, and connections that many people would have used for personal advantage. Yet she never did. She remained exactly the same person whether she was speaking with a company executive or someone working quietly behind the scenes. Alexander eventually asked her why she never tried to use her position to gain more influence. Amara looked surprised by the question. Because influence without integrity does not mean much, she answered. A person can have everyone's attention and still have nothing meaningful to offer. Alexander remained silent after hearing those words. In his world, many people wanted to be powerful because they believed power created respect. But Amara understood something different. Respect was created by character. That evening, Alexander looked out over the city from his office window and thought about everything he had witnessed. The woman others dismissed as only an assistant had shown more strength than many people who spent their lives trying to appear important. And slowly, Alexander realized that Daniel's greatest mistake was not insulting Amara. It was failing to understand the person standing in front of him. The following week brought a moment that tested everything Alexander Blackwood believed about loyalty, trust, and the people around him. The Blackwood Foundation was preparing for one of its largest annual events, bringing together business partners, community leaders, and influential guests from across the country. For many people, it was an opportunity to display success and connections. For Alexander, it was another responsibility he had to manage carefully. Amara Johnson arrived early, as always, reviewing every detail before the event began. She checked the guest list, confirmed schedules, and made sure every member of the team knew their responsibilities. She did not do these things because she wanted praise. She did them because she believed every detail mattered when people depended on her. As the evening began, the ballroom, filled with conversations and familiar faces. Alexander moved through the crowd with his usual calm confidence, while Amara quietly handled the details behind the scenes. But then Daniel Whitmore arrived. He entered with the same confidence he always carried, surrounded by people who admired his success. When he saw Amara standing beside Alexander's team, he gave a small smile. He still believed she was only there because Alexander allowed her to be. Daniel approached a group of guests and began speaking about the importance of reputation and social standing. His words were subtle, but everyone understood his meaning. In certain circles, people should understand the difference between being useful and being equal, he said. Several guests became uncomfortable. They recognized that his comments were directed at Amara. She heard him, but remained composed. She had learned that some people revealed more about themselves through their words than they ever realized. Alexander noticed the situation from across the room. For a moment, he remembered the first time he met Amara. She had not tried to impress him. She had not acted differently because of his reputation. She simply approached her work with honesty and professionalism. That was exactly why he trusted her. As Daniel continued his conversation, he failed to notice that many people were no longer agreeing with him. They were watching Amara's reaction instead. They expected frustration or embarrassment. Instead, they saw confidence and grace. That was the moment Alexander understood something important. Amara did not need him to defend her. She had already proven herself. But respect also meant refusing to let someone's unfair words define another person. Alexander walked toward the group, and the conversation slowly stopped. "Daniel," he said calmly, "there is something you misunderstand." Everyone became silent. Alexander looked around the room before continuing. "A person's position does not determine their value. Their actions do." Daniel looked surprised. He expected Alexander to protect his reputation, not challenge his opinion. Alexander continued, "Amara has earned the trust of everyone who has worked closely with her, not because of her title, but because of her character." The room remained quiet. Amara looked at Alexander, surprised by his words, but she also understood something deeper. He was not simply defending her. He was correcting a belief that had caused many people to judge others unfairly. For the first time, Daniel began to realize that his words had not exposed Amara's weakness. They had exposed his own misunderstanding. The woman he dismissed as ordinary had become the person everyone in the room respected. And Alexander Blackwood had made it clear that true worth was never measured by status. It was measured by integrity. The days after the foundation event changed the way people viewed Amara Johnson. But the most important change happened quietly inside Alexander Blackwood. He had spent years surrounded by people who measured success through influence, wealth, and reputation. He understood that world better than anyone. But every day he worked with Amara, he discovered something that challenged everything he thought he knew. She did not seek attention. She did not chase recognition. She simply believed that doing the right thing mattered, even when nobody was watching. One morning, Alexander arrived at the office and noticed Amara helping a new employee organize a complicated schedule. The employee had made several mistakes and looked nervous, expecting criticism. Instead, Amara calmly explained the process and helped them understand what needed to be improved. Alexander watched from a distance and noticed something that impressed him. Amara treated a beginner with the same patience she showed executives and important guests. To her, respect was not something people earned through status. It was something everyone deserved. Later that afternoon, Alexander asked Amara to join him for a private conversation. He wanted to understand something he had been thinking about for weeks. "Why do you never try to use your position for personal advantage?" he asked. Amara looked surprised by the question. She thought for a moment before answering. "Because trust is more valuable than any opportunity one could gain." Alexander remained quiet. In his world, many people believed every connection had a purpose. They helped others because they expected something in return. But Amara seemed to operate by a different standard. She believed a person's actions mattered even when there was no reward waiting. Alexander realized that was exactly why he trusted her. She was one of the few people around him who never changed depending on who was in the room. Meanwhile, Daniel Whitmore began noticing that his comments about Amara had created the opposite effect of what he intended. Instead of making people question her, they made them look closer at her achievements. Employees who had worked with Amara shared stories about her dedication. Business partners mentioned her professionalism. People began recognizing that Alexander's trust in her was not based on personal feelings or convenience. It was based on years of seeing her character. Daniel had focused on a title. Alexander had focused on the person. One evening, Alexander attended a small gathering with several longtime associates. During the conversation, someone mentioned that Amara was different from the people they usually encountered in their world. Alexander simply replied, "That is exactly why she matters." Those words carried more meaning than anyone expected. Alexander was not talking about her role. He was talking about the qualities that made her rare. Loyalty, honesty, compassion, the things that could not be purchased or created through influence. Later that night, Alexander looked through old records from the beginning of his company and found notes about the first projects Amara had helped organize. He remembered how she had solved problems without asking for recognition. He remembered how she had protected the company's interests without seeking personal credit. He remembered how she had always chosen integrity over convenience. For the first time, Alexander understood that the person everyone underestimated had been the person holding everything together all along. And while others were still trying to determine whether Amara belonged in their world, Alexander already knew the truth. She did not need permission to belong. Her character had already earned her place. The weeks that followed brought a change that even Alexander Blackwood noticed. It was not a change that came from a major announcement or a public decision. It happened quietly, through small moments that revealed the difference between reputation and reality. People who once saw Amara Johnson as only an assistant began seeing the qualities that had always been there. They saw her intelligence, her patience, and the way she treated every person with the same level of respect. But the person who noticed the biggest change was Alexander himself. For most of his life, Alexander had believed that trust was something extremely rare. In his position, he had learned to be careful with everyone around him. Many people approached him because of his name, his influence, or the opportunities connected to him. It was difficult for him to know who truly cared and who simply wanted something in return. Amara had always been different. One afternoon, Alexander found her in the office helping a member of the staff prepare for an important presentation. The employee was nervous and worried about making mistakes, but Amara calmly guided them through every detail. She never made the person feel inexperienced or embarrassed. She simply helped them become more confident. Alexander watched the interaction and remembered something important. Amara had been doing this long before anyone started noticing her. She had always created a better environment around her without asking for credit. Later that day, Alexander invited Amara to join him for coffee in the quiet lounge area of the office building. It was unusual because Alexander rarely spent time away from work discussing personal matters. "You know, most people would use your position differently," Alexander said. Amara looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "You have access to information, connections, and opportunities. Many people would use those things to move ahead." Amara smiled gently. "Moving ahead is not meaningful if you lose the values that brought you there." Alexander became silent. Those words stayed with him because they reflected something he had been missing. He had built a life around achievement, but he rarely stopped to consider what kind of person he wanted to become. Amara did not judge him. She did not tell him that his way of thinking was wrong. She simply showed him another perspective through the way she lived. Meanwhile, Daniel Whitmore began facing the consequences of his own attitude. The people around him started questioning why he had been so quick to dismiss Amara. They noticed that the person he called unimportant was actually someone many respected. Daniel had looked at her job title and assumed he understood her value. He never took the time to see her character. One evening, Alexander attended a private meeting with several important associates. During the discussion, someone mentioned Amara and asked why Alexander trusted her so much. Alexander paused before answering. "Because she has proven that trust is earned through actions, not appearances." The room became quiet. Everyone understood the meaning behind his words. Alexander was not simply talking about an assistant. He was talking about the kind of person everyone hoped to have around them. As the night ended, Alexander looked at the city outside his office window and thought about everything that had changed. The woman others ignored had become the person who reminded him what respect truly meant. And for the first time, Alexander Blackwood understood that the strongest people were not always the ones who commanded attention. Sometimes, they were the ones who quietly earned it. The relationship between Alexander Blackwood and Amara Johnson continued to change in ways that surprised everyone around them. It was not built through grand gestures or promises. It was built through countless small moments that showed the difference between someone who wanted attention and someone who truly cared. Alexander had spent years believing that people were defined by what they could offer. In his world, loyalty was valuable, but it was also rare. Many people smiled in front of him while secretly waiting for an opportunity to benefit from his position. Amara challenged that belief without ever trying to. She simply remained consistent. One morning, Alexander arrived at the office and noticed something unusual. Amara was not at her desk. For years, her presence had been part of the rhythm of his daily life. She was always prepared, always organized, and always aware of what needed to be done. When he asked about her absence, he learned that she was helping a community program connected to the Blackwood Foundation. She had volunteered to assist with planning because she believed the organization should focus on people, not just numbers and achievements. Alexander decided to visit the program himself. What he saw surprised him. Amara was speaking with families, helping employees coordinate activities, and making sure everyone felt included. She was not acting differently because Alexander was there. She did not even notice him at first. She was simply being herself. That moment revealed something important to Alexander. Her kindness was not a performance. It was who she was when nobody important was watching. Later that afternoon, Alexander spoke with Amara about what he had seen. "Why do you put so much effort into helping people who cannot give anything back to you?" he asked. Amara smiled softly. "Because not everything valuable has a price." Alexander thought about that answer for a long time. He had spent much of his life surrounded by transactions. People exchanged favors, connections, and opportunities. But Amara reminded him that some things existed beyond personal gain. Respect, compassion, trust. Meanwhile, Daniel Whitmore watched as the opinion around him slowly changed. The people who once listened to his judgments began seeing the reality for themselves. They realized Amara was not someone who had gained a place through luck or association. She had earned it through years of dedication. Daniel had underestimated her because he only saw the surface. He saw an assistant. He never saw the person behind the title. One evening, Daniel approached Alexander privately. His confidence was different now. He no longer spoke with the same certainty he had before. He admitted that perhaps he had misunderstood Amara. Alexander listened quietly before answering. The biggest mistake people make is believing they already know someone before taking the time to understand them. Daniel had no response. The truth was simple, but difficult to accept. He had judged Amara based on what he assumed instead of what he knew. As Alexander walked through the office later that night, he saw Amara finishing her work. She looked tired but peaceful, still focused on completing her responsibilities. He realized something that changed his perspective forever. The person who had been standing beside him every day was not valuable because she supported his success. She was valuable because she represented the kind of character he respected most. And for the first time, Alexander understood that the strongest relationships were not created through power. They were created through trust, understanding, and the courage to see people for who they truly were. The following months brought a transformation that nobody expected, especially Alexander Blackwood. The man who once believed that strength came from control had discovered a different kind of strength. He learned that trust could not be demanded, respect could not be forced, and loyalty could not be purchased. They were earned through actions, through consistency, and through the way a person treated others when there was nothing to gain. Amara Johnson remained the same person she had always been. She continued arriving early, helping others, and handling responsibilities with quiet confidence. She never changed because people finally noticed her. She never needed approval from those who once ignored her. Her value had existed long before anyone recognized it. One evening, Alexander held a private gathering at the Blackwood estate. It was not a large event filled with displays of wealth or influence. It was a simple dinner with people who had played important roles in his life. For the first time, Alexander invited Amara not as his assistant, but as someone he genuinely respected. When she arrived, some guests who had once overlooked her greeted her differently. They no longer saw only her position. They saw her character. During dinner, Alexander stood and spoke to everyone in the room. He did not talk about business achievements or financial success. Instead, he spoke about the importance of recognizing people who quietly make a difference. "The easiest mistake is judging someone by what you see first," Alexander said. "The harder thing is taking the time to understand who they truly are." Everyone listened carefully. Amara looked at him with a small smile because she understood the meaning behind those words. Alexander was not only talking about her. He was talking about the lesson he had learned. After the dinner, Daniel Whitmore approached Amara. His expression was different from before. The confidence and arrogance he once carried had been replaced by honesty. He apologized for underestimating her and admitted that he had judged her without knowing her story. Amara accepted his apology with grace. She did not need him to feel embarrassed. She only wanted him to understand. That was the difference between them. Daniel wanted to prove who was better. Amara wanted people to become better. Later that night, Alexander and Amara stood outside the estate, looking at the city lights. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence was peaceful. Alexander finally admitted something he had never said before. I spent most of my life believing people respected power. But I was wrong. Amara looked at him and asked, "What did you learn?" Alexander smiled slightly. That respect comes from character. Power can make people notice you, but character makes people remember you. Those words represented the journey he had taken. He was still the same powerful man, but he was no longer the same person. He had learned to see beyond appearances. He had learned that the person standing beside him was not valuable because of what she did for him. She was valuable because of who she was. Years later, people would still remember the story of Alexander Blackwood and Amara Johnson. They would remember the moment when a woman who was underestimated showed everyone what true dignity looked like. They would remember that the greatest mistake a person can make is judging someone before understanding them. And they would remember that real respect is never created by titles, wealth, or influence. It is created by the heart behind the name.